Hi folks, it's Tino here and delighted to be joined here on the Celtic Exchange by Anthony Joseph of Sky Sports News. Regular listeners will know that Anthony's been a good friend to the show and very often jumps on after Celtic's transfer windows, whether that's in the summer or in January. This time around we've done it a wee bit different and Anthony's jumping on just now ahead of the January window, hopefully give us some good news or some speculation or just anything, Anthony, just to get excited about, to hold on to. But we'll get there as we get through the recording. In the meantime, though, welcome back to the Celtic Exchange. How's things at your side?
Yeah, thank you for having me on again. It's always a pleasure. I will try my best to give some good news and opinions on this season so far as well. But yeah, all good. Thanks. Just very much looking forward to Christmas and New Year before the start of what's going to be potentially quite a busy January transfer window.
Yeah, well, here's hoping from a Celtic point of view. And if there's no real rumours, Anthony, feel free just to make something up and we can take it from there. Just generally, though, before...
Morelos a free agent still?
I've seen and heard that. I would not entertain it one bit, but some might. That's up to them. Just generally speaking, though, before we do get into it, I'd be keen to hear your thoughts just in general on Celtic stuff at the moment. So obviously, bit of a bump in the road. There's no getting away from that. A couple of losses back-to-back in the league. Green Brigade back in tomorrow. We're recording here on Friday, albeit this show goes live on Sunday, Christmas Eve. Green Brigade back in should, raise the levels at Celtic Park, should give the players a boost, but we're in a wee bit of a sticky spell at the moment.
They are, and I still feel like the signs were there, perhaps, but it's been quite underwhelming. I think there was this sort of wave of hope and optimism around Brendan Rodgers coming back. I know some fans weren't on board, but I think even though people weren't happy that he was back, I think they acknowledged that he was a good coach, one of the top coaches in world football. But it's just been underwhelming. I think the summer transfer window was underwhelming. I think the football on display has been underwhelming. The sort of mentality hasn't really been there. And they look a real shadow of their former selves. And I remember saying this just like at the end of September. Same thing, that they look a shadow of their former selves, thinking it would perhaps improve. And then the Champions League campaign has been really disappointing. I think, yes, they picked up 4 points, which is similar to like Man United and others, but it was 4 points from a meaning. 3 of those points were in a meaningless game. So it's just been underwhelming and quite disappointing. But I think the signs were there due to the way the summer transfer window went.
Yeah, which leads us nicely into that. You and I spoke just after the summer transfer window, Anthony, and you quite rightly pointed out, now listen, we had limited information on the various players. Some came with good pedigree, some were very much the unknown, guys like Quan, for example. But there's no doubt Celtic spent money in the window, the best part of 20-odd million. So far for me, to defend the board at this moment in time. What I would say is they did spend the money, but it's certainly debatable if they spent it effectively or not.
Yeah, and whether it was effectively for this season, there's a lot of these players are still, the jury's out on them, and many of them, I think it's unfair to say that they're a failure. A lot of the players were project signings, so they're hoping to be for signings for the future, I guess, aren't they? They're not necessarily this season, not even necessarily next season. These are meant to be signings that should be helping Celtic progress in the years to come. But is the best use of their time at Celtic at the moment playing in the Lowland League? Is the best use of their time going out on loan? Perhaps that is a better option. Should they be going out on loan to Scottish Premiership clubs to see actually how they would cope with the league first? That kind of strategy, I don't feel has been effective for these project signings yet. And there were just not enough ready-made first-team signings. That's, I think, evident now. And that's becoming a real issue for Celtic. Lewis Palma, I think, is the only one who's come in and looks the real deal. And he looks a real player as well, actually. I wouldn't really say Celtic have missed Jota too much They probably missed having a Jota and a Bada on both sides, but I think if Palma's there and they can get a Bada back and Maida back as well, that they'll be okay. I think the void of Jota has probably been filled actually, but in terms of other players like Starfelt, jury's still out on Nawrocki and Lagerbielke as well. Lagerbielke's future in doubt as well.
Yeah.
There's been many injuries as well, so they have been hampered by injuries. So that sort of did change the strategy towards the end of the transfer window. So the players that they probably didn't get that they were seen as priority signings in the summer window were a goalkeeper, a left back, and a striker. So they ended up looking for an emergency centre back, didn't they, for the last week of the window?
Yeah.
And and they got Palma in to fill that. They were looking for a left winger. They got Palma in to fill that void. So I do see the argument that they've had a lot of injuries. The transfer strategy changed for the last week of the window, and you don't just bring in players for the sake of it as well, unless they're the players that you want and are available. You don't just sign someone because they're a goalkeeper. You don't just sign someone because they're a striker. But it's evident that Celtic lacked the strength and depth to cope with the demands of Champions League football and coming back to the demands of having to win every Scottish Premiership game.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the phrase, if it is a phrase, goalkeeper, left back, striker. I've said those words in that order so many times on recent recordings, but certainly, at the start of summer, where we were still in that transfer window, because I think most folk, almost any Celtic supporter from the outside looking in, could see that those were the areas that we needed strengthening. Then you get to the close of the window. What's that? End of August, start of September. We've replaced various players, or we've recruited in various positions, but not one goalie, not one left back, not one striker. Even just looking at the guys that were brought in, Odin Thiago home, midfield, Marco Tilio, winger, Yang, winger, Louis Palma, winger, Quan, midfield, Mike Nawrocki, Gustav Lagerbielke, Nat Phillips, all central defenders, Bernardo, midfielder. No goalie, no left back, no striker. And that's why everyone was so upset coming out the window. And I don't feel it was an overreaction. And I don't think people were out of order to be thinking that's who we should have replaced. And I mean, what do you think? I used the term there about the team or the board having spent money but not effectively. Do you think they've let Brendan Rodgers down a bit there, because he's been hampered by that lack of strengthening in those three key positions?
Do you think the team have let Brendan Rodgers down, or the board?
The board, sorry. Do you think the board have let him down, not back?
Perhaps, because it's hard to say, isn't it? Because the recruitment team identified targets. So, I mean, we use the goalkeeper situation, for example. Dominic Livakovic was identified as a serious target that Celtic should be going for. I mean, inquiries were made, interest was there. They were monitoring his situation because they knew Fenerbahce were quite advanced with him, and other clubs had spoken to him as well. But when you look at the figures that Livakovic has gone for, £5.7 million, that's doable for Celtic. His wages, 40 grand a week. Perhaps Celtic would have had to make some changes, or he might have had to come down on his wages there, his wage demands, but Celtic could offer it in other ways, like bonuses, Champions League bonus. We progress from the last 16 in the Champions League, you get X amount. Celtic's Champions League bonuses are quite good, actually. So there could have been a way to incentivize a deal to bring him in. And did they do enough to try and approach the player, or did they maybe feel he was too far down the line with Fenerbahce? But it did stall. He did stall with Fenerbahce, and he didn't sign until the last few days of the window. The Scottish window. I know the Turkish window had a bit longer anyway. But yeah, so there's certainly the recruitment team were identifying players, but I guess the question could be, were they backed enough on the targets that they identified? And yeah, that's a valid question and a valid argument to say that perhaps they weren't.
Yeah, and I know you've made the point, and I agree with your point on you don't just sign a goalie, a left back, a striker for the sake of it, just to tick a box and say, well, you wanted a striker, there's a striker. He's not very good, but he's a striker, that kind of thing. And I'm not suggesting that's what Celtic should have done, but I do feel it's become all the more galling, hasn't it, Anthony, when Celtic release their financial figures, and as a fan base, you see there's 70 million plus in the bank. So if Celtic were in a perilous financial situation and having to play safe, everyone would get on board with that and say, well, that's understandable. You need to cut your cloth accordingly. If you've got 70 million in the bank doing nothing, I've heard the term in the last couple of days, Celtic are a well-run business. They're not a particularly well-run football club, because ultimately results are what a football club is judged on. And certainly in Europe, we're just not doing that. So yeah, as I say, let's not just sign players for the sake of it.
Mm-hmm.
And from the sounds of it, and from our previous chat as well, yep, Livakovic was in the conversation in terms of a goalie. I believe Matthias Kvistgaarden, the Brøndby striker, was spoken about, potentially approached in terms of a striker. And I've no doubt there was a couple of left backs in the mix as well. But my own take on it, and it's pure speculation because I don't know the finer detail, is that Celtic haven't been willing to push the boat out. As you say, they might have had to amend their wage structure to get Livakovic in as a goalie, maybe pay more than we should have to Brøndby to get Kvistgaarden in. And Celtic rarely do that. If ever, we don't push the boat out, we don't go the extra mile. If someone's playing hardball with Celtic, we generally walk away. And I don't know, I would debate it's not the best negotiating technique.
It's not. Sometimes it is, I guess. You don't want to pay more than you should for a player that you don't value as highly of, if you know what I mean. So with Kvistgaarden, he's a great example of that, actually, because Celtic did make inquiries and they did negotiate a little bit, but his club were wanting quite a lot more, nearly double what Celtic were valuing him at. So it's that kind of broke down fairly early on. It was never actually far on at all, and Celtic almost were saying, certainly what I was being told, was that they're not going to be getting a striker in before the end of the window, and also with one source telling me that Lewis Palmer can also play up front. And I remember putting that out there, was that it's looking increasingly unlikely that Celtic will go back in for Kvistgaarden. They are unlikely to bring in a striker, and Lewis Palmer can also play up front, because that was what I was being told, because that's what the feeling at the club was. I think since then it has become quite apparent that they need to bring in a striker. I think I've always said you need at least three, but perhaps four good strikers if you're going to be playing Champions League and Scottish Premiership, because you're going to be rotating a lot. You're going to have injuries, and you need to be able to have that same kind of quality going in. And it's such a shame it was for such a short period of time, because Giakoumakis was a good person, a good player to fill that void of Kyogo. I actually like O. I think he brings in a lot of good qualities.
Yep.
But whether he's that man to play a lone striker role, I actually think O and Kyogo could link up really well together. And I feel they have done when they've played together. That St Johnstone game away, where they won it quite late on, was a good example of that. But whether O is the man to be the lone striker, he's still young. So again, he's more of a project signing. But Celtic need ready-made players now. They need that for their squad, especially if they want to go and win this league, which has now become a title race. When perhaps at one point, I think Celtic were 10 points ahead at one point. So it's not just to win the league this season, but also for next year, potentially in the Champions League, where there's going to be more games. And Celtic got to think quite carefully now about, I think the type of player they can bring in might have changed as well due to the current league position and their status in Europe. Because if you're in Europe after Christmas, or even if you're not, if you're running away with the league, which Celtic perhaps could have been at one point, you are almost you're guaranteed the Champions League next season in the new format of the Champions League, which I've stressed many times is really a real growth potential for Celtic, both money-wise and football-wise. And it changes the dynamic of the players they could go for. And if players know that, look, I'm going to play the Scottish Premiership and Scottish Cup for the last 5 months, and then next season playing 8 to 10 Champions League games, a fifth of my season in the Champions League, and going for the domestic honours as well. I think you'd be able to bring in a different type of player based on that. But because it's a title race, and Champions League status is not guaranteed next season, I think some players might think, well, let's see where they are in the summer before I decide where I go.
Yeah,
and that's absolutely fair on a player who has no connection to Celtic or whatever.
It very much changes your negotiating position. You know, whoever makes those phone calls, I don't know if it's Michael Nicholson, if it's Brendan Rodgers himself, I don't know who makes the call. But when you're speaking to players or at least their agent, your sales pitch has changed. You know, you're absolutely right, Anthony. Whereas if you could guarantee those 8/10 Champions League top level European games in the new format, that's a fairly easy sell. You know, you could say to a young up and coming player, here's a great opportunity for you. You don't need to be at Celtic forever, but come for a couple of years, enjoy the spotlight that this brings you, enjoy the big nights at Celtic Park, you know, compete against the best, and then you'll move on with everyone's best wishes if we get the right offer for you. Now your position's changed, and as you rightly say, for the next few months, it's the blood and thunder of the domestic scene. It's the Scottish Premiership and it's the Scottish Cup. Far less exciting, and it's definitely a harder thing to pitch. A really interesting point you make is about the fact that Celtic and any team competing in Europe should have 3, maybe even 4 tried and trusted centre forward strikers. I'd say we've got 1. Kyogo's a bona fide striker, and we know that on his day he can certainly do a brilliant job for Celtic up there. O's a project. I like him as well. I agree with you. I think he's got a lot of good attributes, but he's got a way to go. He's still a development player. And then I really don't like the suggestion that it's okay because Palmer can play centre forward, Dies and Maida can play centre forward. Yeah, but it's not their speciality. You know, you could stick Dies and Maida right back. He could do that as well, but he's just not very good at it, for example. I just don't like it. I don't like we've not signed a striker, so we'll just fudge a non-striker in there. And that's a real issue. What we'll do, Anthony, we'll get back to some of the suggestions as to who Celtic may bring in just shortly, but I'd like to just cover off maybe some of the exits first of all. Highest profile one right now, of course, is the chat that's just started doing the rounds today, Friday, about Matt O'Reilly potentially being a target for Inter Milan. The talk is they want to take him in January on a loan signing with a view to making that permanent this summer. Have you guys picked up anything on that?
Yeah, it was actually our story. It was my colleague Lyle Thomas, who's got good contacts there, and he was aware of their Inter Milan's interest, and Inter Milan being, I mean, a number of clubs. There's a lot of clubs tracking Matt O'Reilly at the moment, and why wouldn't they be? This is a guy who was a star performer in the Champions League games for Celtic and has now become a Denmark international, starting games for Denmark. So he is, and you just watch him, and each time he looks like he's learning and getting better, and he's a player I thought under Rodgers would thrive, and just the type of man management that Rodgers has. He micromanages, he likes developing players, he likes really intelligent players, and Matt O'Reilly is very intelligent for his age. Yeah. I likened the sort of relationship to perhaps Rodgers and Stuart Armstrong, another player who thrived under Rodgers in terms of development. But he's been brilliant, and there's no doubt there's lots of clubs tracking him. The thing is with Inter Milan, they're thinking about making a move in January. So that's the difference. Whereas you've got clubs like Aston Villa, West Ham, Atletico Madrid, who've all sent scouts monitoring his situation. But Inter Milan see it as an opportunity. Well, we want to get him in now, just so we've secured him. So that changes things a little bit. But Celtic in a very good position regarding Matt O'Reilly's just signed a new contract, a bumper contract at that. Celtic rejected £10 million from Leeds United in the last couple of days of the transfer window. that sort of sparked Celtic wanting to get him down on improved terms. Rodgers identified him as a key player for the squad. So they're in a strong position. There's no need to, I mean, when Leeds were coming in with £10 million bids, that the thought process was certainly, from the conversations I had, I don't think Celtic would have entertained anything under 15 million, but even 15 million probably wouldn't have done it. It would have had to be around 20 million to open that conversation, I think, anyway. And with a new contract, that's got to be the case again. The fact he signed a new contract, I would reckon Celtic wouldn't open the conversation unless there was 20 million, maybe even up to 25. Obviously, that changes as things go, as time moves on, and if the player starts trying to engineer a move, that might change things. If he downs tools, that might change things. So there's lots of variables that can happen still to change that. And Juranovic is a good example of that, a player who perhaps went for less than he was valued at. And Starfelt, of course, who could forget the Starfelt situation, went for just around 4 or 5 million. So it's not, but well below what Celtic would have valued him at had he not been pushing to move away. So O'Reilly, I mean, I still think Celtic have a strong case for keeping him at the club, and perhaps the Champions League situation will determine in the summer whether he stays or goes. So that's just, I mean, we've been round this scenario plenty of times with key players at Celtic, haven't we? It's as soon as someone starts doing really well, the clubs from the bigger leagues, let's not suggest they're bigger clubs, but the clubs from the bigger leagues start to think, and Italian clubs have got a good connection with Scottish clubs. They rate the league, they rate players that are doing well in the league, and they've had Italian clubs have had good success out of players coming from Scotland. So it's even more understandable that Inter Milan are looking to do something. Whether Celtic would entertain a loan right now with an obligation to buy, I'm not so sure. I think if Celtic wanted to sell Matt O'Reilly, they'd want the Matt O'Reilly money straight away.
Yeah, I think it'd be madness. I mean, the numbers doing the rounds for Champions League participation in this new format next season, ballpark 60 million, something like that. So it would need to be crazy money in January. You know, I mean, 25 million plus to even have a conversation with Inter Milan, Villa, whoever might be interested. And I just think, given the new contract he signed, the position we're in, I don't think Matt O'Reilly's the kind of guy that would leave mid-season. I think he's quite settled here. He enjoys Glasgow life. He seems to be a very balanced guy. But as you rightly say, Anthony, lots can change, and personal life can change, and who knows? Who knows what the situation might be. I really hope he doesn't move on, because he's been so important to Celtic. He's added so much more to his game, particularly by way of goal return. And if Celtic are to retain the title, and very hopeful that'll be the case, Matt O'Reilly would be key to all of that. So here's hoping nothing untoward kicks off in January. But we'll just need to see. As you see, a lot of things can happen that leads to players moving on. And just on that, so whether it's the players that are just in the door, and I'm thinking of guys like Lagerbielke, who's been talked about recently, or Bernabe, for example, who's been here a bit longer. There are guys on the fringes of Celtic's first team who have been talked about Celtic being open to them moving on in January. Have you heard anything on that, on guys like Lagerbielke, Bernabe, or anyone else?
Yeah, I think if the right offer came in for someone like Lagerbielke, they would perhaps look to it will open the discussion. Bernabe as well. He's got a lot of clubs in Italy and Argentina, his homeland Argentina, looking at him. He also, his situation's a bit different. He's got an Italian passport, so he can. That was also part of getting him the move to Celtic, to increase his chances of a work permit. So he could easily move to Italy without any EU sort of there's not really complications, but any delays or anything like that. But I mean, it's not a foregone conclusion that he's going. But Celtic want a left back, and Greg Taylor is currently the number one left back. So I think that tells its own story about where Bernabe fits in. Also, with Lagerbielke, it just doesn't seem to be Brendan Rodgers' cup of tea at the moment. Anyway, ironically, the man who scored the winning goal for Celtic to win the first Champions League home game in a decade, then the next day, reports in Scotland suggesting that Celtic would be open to selling him. I believe that is the case, that they'd be open to selling him, but it doesn't necessarily mean they will sell him, and it would need to be for a decent fee, I guess, at least recouping the money that they paid for him. But yeah, it doesn't seem to be in favour with Rodgers at the moment, but things can change. Who would have thought we'd be sitting here saying that Liam Scales is one of our best centre-backs? So it's, I remember, I can't remember if it was this podcast, but I remember speaking about it, saying that Welsh and Liam Scales' futures were in doubt with the centre-back situation, with the injury to Carter Vickers and Nawrocki were the reasons they were still at the club. And that Aberdeen, if Liam Scales was available, Aberdeen wanted to sign him permanently, but Liam Scales ended up not being available because Celtic needed him even just for numbers, but he turned into a player who just rose to the occasion and is doing. He does still have his limitations, but that's what you want to see from a fringe player. That is exactly what you want to see from a player who the fans don't really see as being in the Celtic squad or being good enough for the Celtic squad. But he's proven that he can hack it, and he can hack it in the Champions League. So, and he was doing it for Ireland as well internationally. So that's what can happen. I mean, that just shows that things can change. Lagerbielke could come onto a game and things become different. But Rodgers seems, something with Rodgers, he's questioning the mentality of these players quite a few times now. It's not just been on one occasion. So for me, that suggests something's going on there in the training ground as well, that he's seeing mentality-wise and how players are applying themselves. With some players, it's great. Like he speaks so highly of Scales, Matt O'Reilly, Maida, like Kyogo, the likes. But there's certain times where he's played perhaps more fringe players in the side, and then he questions the mentality of the team. So that's, to me, suggests he's not seeing it in training either. Because if he was, he'd be questioning perhaps the roles they're playing. Is it confidence? Is it not enough game time? That kind of thing. But when he's been questioning their mentality, I think it's overall, not just in the matches they're playing.
Yeah, and I think Liam Scales is such a good example of all of that, because I like Liam Scales. I like him because I think he's a very honest player, and I think he's currently maximising on his own talents, limited as they may be. Mike Nawrocki might have a better general skill set than Liam Scales, maybe even Lagerbielke does. I think Liam Scales is getting the absolute max out of what he's got, and I think you've got to admire that. But aside from that, I actually really admire his mental strength, his mental character. He was pitched in. What was the game? Was it St Johnstone first of all, and then the Rangers game the following week, and the rest is history. Before you know it, he's an Irish international. He's a Champions League footballer. And if Liam Scales does move on, it's not to Aberdeen now. His stock has risen, and he can maybe pick from a few more clubs than they might have been able to do so previously. But there was real pressure on Liam Scales' shoulders. I was at the St Johnstone game where I think Stevie May gave him a hard time and a few other guys, and you're thinking, this cannot be the answer. And there was a real tension in the stands every time he got on the ball. And he's just had to ride that out, and he's done so. And he's come through so many games. I think he's now played something like 18, 19 games on the bounce at Celtic, and nobody would have predicted that. Now, I'm not sure if Liam Scales is the future of Celtic, but what he is a really good example to guys like Lagerbielke, to guys like Odin Thiago Holm, whoever it might be that finds himself on the sidelines just now, to say, do you know what? When you do get your chance, this is the kind of approach you need to take to it, and then it's over to you to see what works out. So all credit to Liam Scales. Not sure what the future holds, but he's done what he's had to do in the meantime.
Sorry, another example of that was Greg Taylor last season. Bernabei was brought in to be the left back under Ange, and the sort of European style left back. But Greg Taylor last season was just incredible. And whether it's the change of tactics, the change of style, it's just not working out for him this season. No. And who knows? He might have just peaked last season. and Celtic got the best out of him then because he was so good. Even Champions League games, he was really good, and played really well for Scotland actually last season's games. But this season, I think, is when he was playing for Scotland, I think a lot of people started to realise his limitations.
He certainly had a good couple of seasons under Ange, didn't he? Maybe not immediately under Ange, but very quickly it became apparent that Greg Taylor could fit within that system. And I suppose it's fair to defend Greg Taylor. He's getting a hard time just now, and we've spoken quite critically of him because he's struggling at the moment. But actually, Celtic have tried several times to replace him. I think Ball and Goalie came in. We all remember that guy. Bernabe, as you mentioned, and he's seen these guys off. And it's not Greg Taylor's fault that he's currently the best left back at Celtic. That's the way that's down to the recruitment team and the squad management, whoever kind of deals with ins and outs and all that stuff. So Greg Taylor can only do what he can do as well. He is struggling for form at this time, but he's shown that he also has a mental resilience. And again, that's the message to other guys. I mean, you talk about sliding doors, Anthony, and who knows what's around the corner for some of these guys. I'm reading between the lines. You're telling me there's still a chance for Quan, isn't there?
I have no idea why Celtic signed Quan. Even as a project signing, he was playing in, this is no disrespect to him, but he was playing in the second division of Korean football.
Yeah.
Why not wait? I don't think Celtic are in that rush to own the market there. Mm-hmm. Or that I don't think there's enough competition in the market there to not let him get into the K-League first and see if he starts doing well in the K-League. Because I don't. What's he doing right now? How is he progressing his game at Celtic right now? What is the benefit of Quan being at Celtic?
Yeah,
it was such a strange signing at the time. Unless they thought he was going to be some kind of wonder kid that was going to just break into the first team. But as a project signing, I still thought that was quite a weird one, because why not wait until he's in the top league in his country?
Yeah,
it's not that competitive a market yet for European clubs. It's not like they're going to be fighting off Atletico Madrid and Barcelona for someone who's showing promise in the K-League. They wait until a European club takes a chance on them and then sign them. So it's, a strange one, but he's still very young, and who knows what could happen. I never like saying definitively that a player is not going to do well or whatever, because we've seen too many times players just suddenly becoming amazing. Tom Rogic, for example, where his first few seasons at Celtic, people probably said the same thing. What was the point in signing him? Yeah. But he at least went out on loan and did loan spells and came back. And then it was really under Ronnie Deila that he managed for I would always say Ronnie Deila's legacies were Tom Rogic and Kieran Tierney. So you never know with players, but at the moment, Quan does look a very strange signing. And actually, I would still, it's not even at the moment. I think Quan was a strange signing because they could have waited until he was doing well in the K-League and then getting him.
It's such a strange signing because at the moment, I would argue he's not even living the life of a footballer. He's living the life of a guy who goes and trains and goes home and trains and goes home, and that's it. He found himself bizarrely on the bench against Hearts there last weekend, didn't he? And that was the first anyone had seen him in a matchday squad, I think, since the signing in the summer. And it is so puzzling. And what adds to the intrigue is that Quan himself arrived, and you'll have seen the quotes at the time where he basically said words to the effect of, "I'm going to be the best midfielder in the Scottish League, and then I'm going to go down and do it in the English League as well." It was very... Now, I don't know if that was a wee bit lost in translation, but that was the gist of where he was at. And I was okay with it. Be confident in yourself, believe in yourself, back yourself. But clearly Brendan Rodgers and others have seen or not seen something from him, because he said, I was going to say so little game time. He's had 0 competitive minutes. So such a puzzling one, and we'll just need to watch that space. Let's look at what a lot of folk will be tuning in for, Anthony, in terms of what might be coming in the door at Celtic in January. Now, people will argue we need 3, 4, 5 new signings. There was some rumours that there was an exec club type dinner or lunch there a few days ago, and whether it was Brendan Rodgers or Peter Lawwell or Michael Nicholson, but there was a bit of a Q&A, and somebody says we're targeting 4 guys. We hope to get at least 2 of them. Not sure how true that may or may not have been. But let's look at the kind of headlines. So you and I have mentioned goalkeeper, left back, striker, and it seems that there are some rumours in those various areas. So let's look at the striker first. Anyone doing the rounds? I've seen the guy Silva at Wolves mentioned. I don't know if there's anything in that, but are you hearing anything down that road?
Yeah, well, not specifically on Silva, but he's another player who's been linked by other media outlets, and it wouldn't be a surprise to say, especially the way we've been talking today, that Celtic need to look at getting a striker in. It's a player they didn't. It's a position they weren't able to sign in the summer. So whether they go for Silva or whether they go for other players, I think it's definitely a position we perhaps will see Celtic strengthen in January, not necessarily waiting until the summer. I think left back and striker is probably the two priorities going into this window. I think they're probably content with the goalkeeping situation right now, especially seeing as there's no European football after Christmas. I think they're okay with Joe Hart for now. And yes, goalkeeping position was something that they were looking to strengthen in the summer, as we all know, but they weren't able to get the targets that they wanted to, and then they were fairly content. And there was also reasons with Bain, for example, being part of the homegrown status and filling that quota as well. So they weren't going to have 4 goalkeepers, and Siegrist was not willing to move. So that is also a major reason why Celtic did not go on to sign a goalkeeper that late in the window. But the goalkeeping situation needs to be addressed. Is it because Joe Hart is not getting any younger? You can start to see faults in his game. Perhaps he's not able to perform at the highest level, at the level he used to perform at, perhaps consistently enough. He still has amazing games sometimes. He still shows his worth. He still shows his quality. Still shows why he was England's number 1. He still shows why he was Man City goalkeeper when they won the league. So it's just not enough anymore, though. Yeah. And particularly in Europe, I think we saw that in quite a few of the matches. But he does perform well in quite big games still. And it's just, like I said, it's just becoming more and more inconsistent. So Celtic need to address that. That'll probably be more of a long-term signing, I think. I'd be, unless they can get a target that they really want in January, I think goalkeeper might be signed in the summer. But in terms of left back and striker, I think it would be quite poor of Celtic's recruitment if they did not end this January transfer window with a left back and a striker.
Yeah, I think if you told me, Anthony, that they would get a left back and a striker but no goalie, I could make my peace with that, absolutely. I think in terms of Joe Hart, he's been great for Celtic. Celtic have been great for him, new lease of life, when he thought he was maybe going to hang up the gloves. He was phenomenal against Feyenoord, for example, and he's had some big games for Celtic. And I do think he's capable of seeing out the season. And at that point, it's the natural break point, and he moves on, and we all wish him the best. Benji Siegrist, he's got the best job in football, 15 grand a week apparently, sits on the bench sometimes, not all the time. European travel, stays in top hotels, best sports science, cushy number. But we need to move these guys on. These guys and others are just picking up money and not giving Celtic anything in return. There is a goalie that we've been linked with. So Andre Lunin, he's the backup goalie at Real Madrid. I think he's a third choice goalie at Madrid. He's 24. He's a Ukrainian. I think him and Kepa are the backup goalies to Courtois, but Courtois has picked up a longer term injury. And at the moment, Carlo Ancelotti's got a call to make whether to go with Kepa or Lunin. Have you heard anything about guys like him or others that might be on the radar?
Yeah, I think those are the type of goalkeeper Celtic should be looking at perhaps third choice, second choice at the elite clubs. So I think even Kelleher was linked at Liverpool. That is someone Celtic were looking at and perhaps might still do, but maybe not for this season, because I think Kelleher might be called upon or needed at least for Liverpool this season. So yeah, they definitely need a long-term solution, a long-term number 1 brought in by the summer. So, brought in in the summer by the end of next transfer window, the August transfer window. So it's, yeah, I agree in terms of, like I was saying before, these are the types, these names that are being linked are the types of goalkeepers that Celtic should be going for. People with real pedigree who are going to come in and be the number one, be good enough for the Champions League, and are good enough for European football anyway, and just take that position and make it their own. Celtic can't have a goalkeeper of the same kind of quality as perhaps Bain and Siegrist, and they're all battling for it. Celtic need someone who is a top quality, but and perhaps that does seem to be the way they're looking at it, doesn't it? A maybe second or third choice at one of the elite clubs.
Yeah, I think Kelleher was a good example because he and many other goalies of his ilk, they're good with the ball at their feet. And Celtic play in such a way that we want to start our attacks from the back, get out your feet quickly, zip it out to your right and left back or your centre halves, or even into the midfield from the goalie position and kick off your attacks from there. Joe Hart is fine. I mean, he looks a wee bit awkward on the ball, doesn't he? But if he's only making 10 and 12-yard passes, that's okay. But I think at the moment, Joe Hart's there for his more traditional goalkeeping assets, shot stopping and handling and that kind of thing. You could debate that he's not coming off his line much anymore, if he ever did. But certainly moving forward, whoever Celtic go for, they need to have that full skill set, don't they? The ball at the feet is so important. And Kelleher, yep, I've heard his name mentioned. That would tick the box. I don't know much about Lunin at Real Madrid, but I would anticipate that if you're there at all, you must have something about you. So we'll see where we go. In terms of left back, there is a name doing the rounds. I think just in the last kind of week or so, Tiago Aruja, a 24-year-old left back from Portugal. He's been in the Benfica academy, where Jota was and where Duke, that we're familiar with, was, and he's now at Estoril in Portugal. By all accounts, they've put quite a hefty sell-on fee, as Benfica tend to do. But anything to that, Anthony, him or anyone else at left back?
Yeah, I think he is he's a name out there that Celtic are quite keen on, and not just someone who they've been monitoring, but someone who, through intermediaries, I understand, have made inquiries about. So I think, as Stephen McGowan at the Daily Mail, who has great Celtic sources as well, and he pointed out that, well, he claimed that it's a very strong possibility Tiago Araujo would be coming to Celtic. So I believe that also to be the case, not necessarily a strong possibility, but I believe that Celtic have been making fairly strong inquiries about him, and there's definitely more substance to this name being linked with Celtic. And it's just, he seems to be, I mean, I don't know too much about him. And again, I always remember when I always like to tell people, like, I'm not necessarily a football man. I do the news. I wouldn't be able to tell you too much about what a player is like and that kind of thing. I can only tell you what people tell me about him. And I think he's got a bit more of a physique than Greg Taylor and Bernabei. Taller, but also a bit bigger built, but can also play left wing. So he can be an attacking fullback. And well, actually, I think he's been playing left wing more, from what I understand. And he can also feel like he's very naturally a left wing back or a left back as well. So, I think we could possibly see a bid going in next month. It wouldn't surprise me if that's the case, but there's still a few, 10 or so days before the end of the window, and before the start of the window. So other players could come available, other options could come. So it'll all depend on a number of things. I don't like to speculate at the best of times, but I definitely don't like to speculate before a window's even open on these things. But it wouldn't surprise me if Celtic put a bid in for Tiago Araujo.
Got you. So Tiago Araujo definitely signing first week in January. I hear you. I think you mentioned the physicality, and I think that's important because Brendan Rodgers has said just that. He wants more of a physical presence. Greg Taylor, for all the ability he has and whatever he's done at Celtic, he's never going to be that guy. You know, he doesn't have that physical stature. Bernabe is the same. And I think Brendan Rodgers is looking just to shore up the team with just a bit more physicality across the board. I believe Origi is 6'1", and I think that would certainly, you know, fit the bill in there. A lot of folks say as well, Brendan Rodgers traditionally likes a more powerful centre forward. Now, he'd be spoiled at the time, didn't he? He'd Dembele and Edward at different times to call upon. Less so at Leicester, he had Jamie Vardy, but Jamie Vardy's quite a unique striker. He's a pretty special player at that level, and you're not going to replace him. But I do wonder if he's going to look to bring more power into the team, whether it is at centre forward, at left back, even at goalkeeper. There is an attacking midfielder that's been linked to, I think it's just a new rumour, Anthony. Again, not sure if there's anything to it. Romeo Amani, 20-year-old attacking midfielder. He's playing at Häcken over in Sweden, but he's from the Ivory Coast. I don't know much of anything about him beyond those headlines. Is that someone you're aware of? And do you think Celtic needs somebody in that number 10 position?
Not someone I'm aware of, to be completely honest. And again, it's before the transfer window. So when it's not the transfer window, I very rarely check in on things like that, or actually even in terms of sources, don't really give out too much unless it's players who are looking to move themselves. But yeah, it's certainly one I'll be checking out. But again, I don't think it's a priority position for Celtic right now, attacking midfielder. I think they've got plenty of them. But I guess if perhaps like Turnbull was to go, and if something changes in the Matt O'Reilly situation, that might affect where they dip their toes into the market on that kind of position. But yeah, I mean, lots of names before the window even opens get thrown about, and then nothing materializes. But that's all usually because it's not that that's rubbish. It's just usually because people know that Celtic have been tracking this player.
Yeah.
Or they've sent scouts to watch this player. And so it quite often becomes, well, there is interest there, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to put in a serious bid in January.
Yeah, I think what we'll need to do is give you a bell on the first, Anthony. We'll get a chat once the window opens and it all starts to light up. But you're right, we're closing in on that window, and I suppose the reality for Celtic is that guys like David Turnbull and Joe Hart, they're both in the last 6 months, give or take, of their deal. They could effectively make their call at the start of January, and I wouldn't be surprised if David Turnbull did announce that he was maybe heading down to the Championship, or even trying something in Europe, whatever it might be. I think Nat Phillips will return to Liverpool. It's not quite worked out. And I don't know about Bernardo. Bernardo's here on loan with an option to buy. It's quite peculiar, his situation, isn't it? He seems to play in the Champions League, but not much domestically. And the suggestion is Celtic would need to pay somewhere between 6 and 7 million for him. And based on what I've seen, and he's done okay, I'm not sure if that represents true value for a guy like that. So do you see guys like him and Phillips potentially seeing out their time and moving on?
Yeah, well, Phillips was just a short-term deal. It was almost an emergency 5-month loan was what it was. My understanding is that he's expected to go back to Liverpool, and Liverpool are going to try and find him another club in the Championship. So, yeah, I think his situation is very much all but sorted out. Celtic brought him in because Stephen Welsh, Nawrocki, Carter Vickers, and Kobayashi were all injured. 4 out of the 6 centre-backs that they had at the club were injured. So they needed more strength and depth. He was in the last few days of the window. He was someone who's played Champions League football before at Liverpool, picking up a decent wage. It was worth bringing him in. It hasn't worked out for him. I don't think he's looked up to the standard that Celtic need from a defender, a centre-back. So it's just the way it is. But luckily for all parties, that they were not tied into anything further than the 5 months. So I think he'll be leaving, and Liverpool will probably try to find him another club.
Yeah. And Bernardo, would you pay the money for him?
I think you need a good 6 months out of him, more than what we've seen so far.
Yeah.
He looks like a player at times. We just haven't seen him enough. He looks capable. but is it worth spending 6 or 7 million on if you're going to also keep the likes of Matt O'Reilly, if Hatate's still going to be there, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think the jury's still out on Bernardo from both, but probably Bernardo's perspective and Celtic's perspective.
Yeah, and just to put you on the spot as such in terms of ins and outs, I think Brendan Rodgers has made no secret of the fact that he needs to trim the squad. I think he was quoted as saying it's a 32-man squad, which is outrageous. You just can't manage that number. So I think there are going to be a number of exits, but ultimately, and we can maybe leave the goalie position aside, do you think Celtic will get the priority positions covered by the end of January?
If you're leaving goalkeeper out of it, yeah, as in, I think priority positions are left back and strikers, and I think they'll get that by the end of January. Yeah, whether the striker ends up being someone who is not long term, for example, I think left back they would probably want someone, especially if Bernabei is potentially leaving, they would want to have a left back in who's a permanent signing. The striker wouldn't necessarily surprise me if that was a loan. If they weren't able to get their main targets for the striker position, they might just want to strengthen that position to win the title, to help them, to make sure they're not caught short if Kyogo and O are injured. That could also be a loan, but I think their priority is definitely to try and get a permanent left back and striker.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll sign a striker, but say that, listen, he can also play left back, so don't worry about it. We've not bought a bona fide left back, but this guy can do the job of both. We'll need to see.
Has there ever been a striker who can also? Has there ever been a striker who can also play left back? I'm trying to think.
We might just be about to see it. That aside, Anthony, just in terms of transfer stuff, so hopefully you and I can catch up maybe around about a month from now. We'll get a further chat at the end of January, start of February, and we can review the business that Celtic have done or not done. We'll see how that goes. But that aside, just very generally speaking, do you think we'll see Brendan Rodgers now kick on? He's come through a difficult spell. We've struggled for consistency. Celtic haven't put 3 wins together at any point across the 25, 26 games we've played so far. We're about to enter that crucial, kind of Christmas, New Year period before the winter break. But over the piece, do you think Brendan Rodgers and whoever he gets in January will have enough to get Celtic over the line title-wise?
I think he should have enough. I think there's enough already there in that squad that they've got, and having Brendan Rodgers as manager, we can't. Yes, there's been quite an underwhelming start, and something has looked a bit off. But this is what Celtic are paying big money for Brendan Rodgers for. He's meant to be one of the top coaches, and he sees himself as one of the top coaches in the world. He's going to have to earn his money big time, and this is a real challenge for him actually. Going into the derby, then going into the winter break, going into the Asian Cup as well. So yeah, I think Celtic should have enough. Whether they do is going to be up to how Brendan Rodgers, the board, the recruitment, everything pans out. And I'm not just talking on the field. I mean, like we're talking about the Green Brigade being banned, or that kind of situation. It's just caused more unrest and more hassle and brought more attention on the club than perhaps needed to be.
Yeah.
So it's there. I think Rodgers was calling for unity in his press conference earlier today, and ahead of the Livingston game. But that what he's meaning there is the whole club, the fans, the board, everyone needs to be pulling in the same direction. And you can't always get that at football clubs. I get that. But Celtic were blessed with that for 2 seasons under Ange.
Yeah.
Everyone was pulling in the same direction. Everyone bought into what Ange was doing. He was almost like a messiah figure. And to be fair, Rodgers was in his first season at Celtic as well. But he's got to sort of earn that respect back from the people who were saying, well, what have you come back for? Not the people that are doubt. I don't think many people doubt his abilities, but people doubt his motive and reasoning for coming back.
Yeah, I think that's what it's at. And I think He was always going to be given maybe less goodwill than any other new manager might have been, given the way that he left last time out. And I think that's proved to be the case. He's had a couple of bumps in the road at this moment in time, and people have been very quick to jump on. I'm actually surprised at the calls, for him to be sacked, that he's not the right man for the job. And maybe it's the minority. Sometimes I go on Twitter and believe that's real life, and maybe that's a fault on me. But there's no doubt there's been a disconnect across the club, whether it's been the ongoing Green Brigade, club battle, maybe some disconnect between Rodgers and the board, all these kind of things. And I can understand that call for unity. I think that's what we need. Any club divided is going to struggle. You're not going to be successful longer term if that's your approach. So I'd like to think maybe, the Green Brigade getting back in and a few other things, a strong January window might just start to repair some relations across the board, and hopefully Celtic can kick on from there. Just any final comments, Anthony, from yourself in terms of what you expect from this January transfer window. We've all seen how Celtic operate at different times. Sometimes it works well, sometimes not so much, and I'd argue the summer there was one of the poorest in recent times. But what are you expecting to see just as we're starting to close out this episode?
I'm expecting at least a couple of ready-made starting signings. I think one will come in the form of a left back. The other will be competition for the strikers. And I think there'll be quite a few outgoings, quite a few, whether that's even just loans on some of the projects, but also they might have offers come in for the likes of Bernabei, Lagerbielke. And I do think they might be tested on Matt O'Reilly and maybe even Hatate. And that might prove to be quite a test. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops, because two prized assets on long-term contracts. I think there's a lot of interest in both of those players, and whether that interest is acted upon in January, while there's the uncertainty for Celtic at the moment of promising these players Champions League football next season, and whether that might be an influence as well. So let's see how that develops. But yeah, I think left back, striker, plenty of outgoings, quite a few away on loan of the projects, and I'm expecting a test on O'Reilly or Hatate or both.
Yeah, you're going to have me stressing over my Christmas dinner, Anthony, at the prospect of Matt O'Reilly leaving mid-season, and Real Hatate, a player I love, and I hope he's back sometime soon. Anthony, as always, it's just a big thank you from myself. It's always great to catch up on the various comings and goings. Hopefully Celtic are in decent shape by the time the January window opens, and hopefully we're even better shape by the close of that. As I said, it'd be great to catch up with you then. But in the meantime, Anthony, have a great Christmas, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. Hope everyone else has a good Christmas and New Year.